What happens when a homeless boy saves a billionaire's life? Sometimes, life's most unexpected moments come from the people we least expect. In a busy city full of noise and rushing people, no one is paying attention to the small moments happening around them. Rich people sat in fancy restaurants, eating expensive meals, while others struggled just to get by. But on this day, something happened that no one expected. A young homeless boy, no older than 10, wearing old, torn clothes and with dirt on his face, suddenly shouted from the street, "Don't eat that!" At a nearby cafe, a rich billionaire was about to take a bite of his fancy meal. He stopped, his fork frozen in the air. At first, he was annoyed. Who was this boy to shout at him like that? But what happened next shocked him to his core. Because the boy wasn't just shouting for no reason. He was trying to save the billionaire's life. In that single moment, everything changed. You won't believe what happened after that. If you want to hear more amazing stories like this, hit the subscribe button now. Don't forget to like this video and comment below. What would you do if this happened to you? A seemingly ordinary day. It was just another typical afternoon in the heart of the city. The streets buzzed with life, honking cars, hurried footsteps, and the constant hum of people talking on their phones or chatting with friends. Office workers rushed to grab a quick lunch. Tourists snapped photos of towering skyscrapers, and street vendors called out, trying to sell their goods to anyone who would listen. Among the crowd was Thomas Gray, a billionaire known for his wealth and success. Dressed in an expensive suit and polished shoes, he looked every bit the powerful businessman. He was used to the attention his status brought, but today he blended in, just another face in the bustling city. Feeling hungry, Thomas decided to stop by one of the city's most luxurious restaurants. The place was known for its five-star meals and elite clientele. As he stepped inside, the soft glow of chandeliers and the quiet murmur of wealthy diners created an atmosphere of calm, far from the chaos outside. Thomas ordered his usual, a gourmet dish that cost more than what some people earned in a week. The waiter brought his plate with a smile, placing the beautifully arranged food in front of him. Thomas picked up his fork, ready to take his first bite. But just as the fork neared his mouth, a loud voice cut through the quiet restaurant. "Don't eat that!" The shout was sharp and unexpected, causing heads to turn and conversations to stop. Thomas froze, his fork hovering in the air. His eyes scanned the room, searching for the source of the outburst. At the entrance of the restaurant stood a young homeless boy, his clothes tattered and dirty, his face thin and pale. The boy's eyes were wide with fear as he stared directly at Thomas. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Thomas lowered his fork slowly, confusion and curiosity mixing on his face. What could this boy possibly know about his food? And why did he look so scared? The restaurant manager rushed toward the boy, ready to drag him out. But Thomas raised his hand, stopping him. "Wait," Thomas said firmly, his eyes still locked on the boy. "Let him speak." The boy's voice trembled as he took a step forward. "Please, sir, don't eat that. It's not safe." A wave of murmurs spread through the restaurant. Diners exchanged puzzled glances, wondering what the boy could possibly mean. Thomas felt a strange chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a random outburst. There was something more, something serious. "Why do you say that?" Thomas asked, his voice steady, but his heart pounding. The boy swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with tears. "Because," he whispered, "I saw what they did to it." And with those words, the seemingly ordinary day took a shocking turn that no one in that restaurant, especially Thomas, would ever forget. The moment that changed everything. The entire restaurant fell silent. The clinking of silverware, the quiet conversations, All of it stopped. Every eye in the room was now on the small boy standing at the entrance, his chest rising and falling with panicked breaths. Thomas felt a shiver run down his spine. The boy's words weren't just random. There was fear in his voice. Real fear. His grip on the fork tightened. He had eaten at this restaurant countless times. It was one of the most expensive places in the city, known for its exclusivity and security. The idea that his food could be tampered with sounded ridiculous. And yet, something about the boy's desperation told him not to ignore this. He lowered his fork completely. "Explain," Thomas said, his voice calm but firm. "What did you see?" The boy hesitated, glancing around as if afraid someone was watching. His hands were shaking. I was outside," the boy stammered. "Behind the restaurant. I was looking for food in the trash when I saw a man. He was messing with a plate. He took something from his pocket, a small bottle, and poured something onto the food." A ripple of gasps spread through the room. Some diners leaned forward, watching in curiosity, while others scoffed, whispering that this was nonsense. Thomas's stomach twisted. "What did he look like?" he asked carefully. The boy's breathing was shaky. "He wore a uniform, like the waiters here. But his hat was pulled down low, and he kept looking around like he didn't want anyone to see him." The restaurant manager stepped forward, his face red with anger. "This is ridiculous. This boy is lying to get attention. He's a street kid, probably trying to get a free meal." Thomas held up a hand, silencing him. His instincts were screaming at him to listen. He turned back to the boy. "Are you sure it was my plate?" The boy nodded frantically. "Yes, I saw them take it straight to your table. I wanted to say something sooner, but I was scared they'd throw me out before I could warn you." Thomas's heart pounded. He glanced at his plate. Could it be true? Was his food actually poisoned? Slowly, he turned to the waiter who had served him. The man in the crisp uniform stood motionless, but there was something off about him now. His hands were stiff at his sides, his face pale. Then Thomas saw it. A bead of sweat rolled down the waiter's temple, a small, almost imperceptible twitch in his fingers. And that's when Thomas knew. The boy was telling the truth. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Thomas inhaled sharply, his mind racing. Who wanted to poison him? Why? And who else was involved? The pieces weren't fitting together yet, but one thing was certain. Someone in this restaurant had just tried to kill him, and now he had to figure out who, before it was too late. The shocking truth. The restaurant had fallen into a stunned silence. The homeless boy's desperate warning still hung in the air, echoing in Thomas Gray's mind. The billionaire stared at his untouched plate, his appetite gone. His instincts screamed that the boy wasn't lying. But why? Why would someone try to poison him? Thomas turned his sharp gaze toward the waiter who had served him. The man's hands trembled slightly, his jaw clenched. He looked nervous, too nervous. "Sir, this is ridiculous," the restaurant manager scoffed. "This child is just trying to cause trouble." Thomas raised his hand, cutting him off. His focus remained on the waiter. "Tell me the truth," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Did you do something to my food?" The waiter's breathing quickened. I don't know what you mean." The boy stepped forward, his small fists clenched. "I saw you." His voice cracked with emotion. "You put something in his food." The color drained from the waiter's face. Thomas pushed back his chair slowly and stood, his towering presence now fully directed at the man in uniform. "Why?" The waiter's lips trembled. He glanced around as if looking for an escape, but there was nowhere to run. His knees buckled, and suddenly he collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I had no choice," he whispered. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "No choice? Someone forced you?" The waiter shook his head. "Number it was me. I did it because of you." A stunned silence followed. The weight of the words settled between them like a heavy storm. Thomas folded his arms. "Explain." Tears welled up in the waiter's eyes. His fingers dug into his hair as he let out a shaky breath. "Because of you, I lost everything." Thomas's expression didn't change, but his heart clenched. "How?" The waiter lifted his head, his face filled with anguish. "I used to work for your company, 5 years. I was a warehouse manager, working long hours to provide for my family. And then, one day I was fired." Thomas frowned. His company was massive, with thousands of employees. He didn't know every firing personally. "Why?" The man let out a bitter laugh. "Why? You should know, they said I was stealing." His voice cracked. "But I wasn't. I swear I wasn't. I was just trying to survive." Thomas inhaled sharply. Stealing. He had strict policies in place to ensure fair treatment. But if this man had been let go for theft, then there was evidence. Still, something didn't add up. "What exactly happened?" Thomas asked, his voice softer now. The waiter wiped his tears, his hands shaking. "My wife got sick. Medical bills kept piling up, and I borrowed some items from the warehouse. Just a few things. A couple of office supplies. Some food from the company cafeteria. I planned to put it back once I had enough money. But someone reported me." He sniffled. "I begged them to let me explain. I wasn't stealing for greed. I was just trying to help my family. But they fired me without hesitation. No second chances, no warning, just gone." A heavy silence filled the room. Thomas exhaled slowly. Now it made sense. The man hadn't tried to kill him because of greed, power, or conspiracy. He had done it out of pain, out of desperation. For the first time, Thomas saw him, not as a criminal, not as a man who had poisoned his food, but as a father, a husband, a human being who had been pushed to his breaking point. And yet, despite his anger, despite his heartbreak, the man hadn't gone through with it. The boy had stopped him, his own son. The realization hit Thomas like a tidal wave. He looked at the small boy, the one who had just saved his life, and his heart tightened. This child had watched his father fall apart, and yet, even after everything, he had chosen to do the right thing. Thomas took a deep breath, then turned back to the waiter. "What's your name?" The man hesitated. Michael Carter." Thomas nodded. It was time for him to make a decision, and he already knew what it would be. Not revenge, not punishment, but something much greater. Because sometimes the best way to defeat anger was with kindness. The Billionaire's offer of redemption. The weight of the moment hung in the air. The restaurant had gone eerily silent, every set of eyes fixed on Thomas and the broken man before him. Michael Carter. A man who had nearly thrown his life away out of desperation. Now sat trembling, ashamed, unable to meet Thomas's gaze. But Thomas wasn't angry. He was thinking, processing, understanding. He glanced at the boy, the one who had stopped a terrible mistake from happening. The child who, despite his own struggles, had done the right thing. That alone spoke volumes. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. His voice wasn't harsh, wasn't full of condemnation. "You hate me," he said simply. Michael looked up, guilt flashing in his tired eyes. "I did." He let out a shaky breath. "But now I don't know." Thomas sat down across from him. "What you did was wrong," he said firmly. "You could have killed me today." Michael swallowed hard, nodding. "I know, and I regret it." The little boy, still standing by the doorway, suddenly sniffled. "Please, sir." His voice was soft, trembling. "Don't send my dad to jail. He's all I have." That's when Thomas's heart fully cracked. He had built his empire on tough decisions, on logic, strategy, and discipline. But sitting before him was a man who had been backed into a corner, A father who had lost everything, and a son who had risked it all to stop him from making an irreversible mistake. And suddenly, Thomas saw himself. Years ago, before the billions, before the power, he had been that boy, hungry, helpless, abandoned by a father who made the wrong choices. But someone had helped him once, give him a chance when no one else would. Now it was his turn to do the same. Thomas inhaled deeply, then leaned forward. "I'm not pressing charges." Gasps rippled through the restaurant. The manager, still standing nearby, looked horrified. "Sir, what?" Thomas raised a hand, silencing him. His eyes remained locked on Michael. "But," he continued, his voice calm yet firm, "you will work for me again." Michael's eyes widened. What?" Thomas nodded. "Under one condition: no stealing, no shortcuts. You will earn your way back." He gestured toward the boy. "Not for you, for him." Michael's face crumbled. Tears streamed down his cheeks. I don't deserve this," he whispered. "No," Thomas said, "you don't." He glanced at the boy. "But he does." The child's lips trembled, his small hands gripping the fabric of his oversized hoodie. He wiped his eyes and looked up at Thomas with gratitude, with something close to hope. Michael broke down completely. He covered his face, sobbing. The weight of years of pain, of helplessness, of mistakes, all crashing down at once. His son ran forward, wrapping his small arms around his father. "Dad, it's okay," the boy whispered. "We're gonna be okay." Thomas stood up, smoothing out his suit. His voice was steady, unwavering. "Redemption isn't given. It's earned. Prove to me that I didn't make the wrong choice today." Michael wiped his tears, nodding furiously. "I will, I swear I will." Thomas gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good." Then, for the first time in years, he smiled. Because today wasn't just about saving his own life. It was about saving two more. A future for the boy who saved his life. As the weight of the moment settled, Thomas looked at the little boy, the one who had risked everything to save a stranger. This child had done what most adults wouldn't. He had stood up for what was right, even when it meant going against his own father. Thomas crouched down to meet the boy's wide, teary eyes. "What's your name?" he asked gently. The boy sniffled. "Ethan." Thomas smiled. "Ethan, do you know what you did today?" The child hesitated, then nodded. "I stopped my dad from making a big mistake." Thomas's heart clenched. This boy wasn't just brave. He was wise beyond his years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, pressing it into Ethan's small hands. "This is my personal number. From now on, you and your dad aren't alone." Ethan looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Thomas exhaled slowly. "I mean, I'm going to take care of your education, your future. Whatever you want to be, doctor, lawyer, even a businessman, you'll have that chance." Ethan's eyes widened. "You mean, like a scholarship?" Thomas smiled. "More than that." He glanced at Michael, the boy's father, who was still wiping his tears. "Your dad is going to work hard to prove himself. But you're going to have every opportunity that I never did when I was your age." The restaurant was silent. Every diner, every staff member watched in awe. Ethan's lips trembled. "Why would you do that for me?" Thomas rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Because you saved my life today. And I believe in rewarding kindness with kindness." Ethan threw himself into Thomas's arms, hugging him tightly. Thomas, a man who had built his fortune on logic and business deals, felt something he hadn't in a long time. Warmth, true purpose. He had spent years chasing success. But today he had changed lives. As he stood up, he looked at Michael. "You have a son to be proud of. Michael, still overwhelmed with emotion, nodded. I know. Thomas took one last look at Ethan. You're going to do great things, kid. Then, with a satisfied nod, he turned and walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the busy streets of the city. For the first time in years, he felt lighter. Because today wasn't just about money, power, or survival. It was about choosing to change someone's life, and that was a deal worth making. A lesson in kindness. And Second Chance's life isn't just about power, money, or success. It's about the choices we make. Thomas Gray had every reason to seek revenge, to punish the man who tried to harm him. But instead, he chose compassion. He chose to break the cycle, to help a desperate father, and reward the bravery of a young boy who did what was right, even when it was difficult. Because true strength, it isn't in wealth, it isn't in status, it's in forgiveness, it's in lifting others up when the world has knocked them down. Ethan could have stayed silent. He could have let fear control him. But he spoke up, saved a life, and in return, his own life was changed forever. And that's the truth about kindness. It always comes full circle. A question for you. What would you have done in Thomas's place? Would you have forgiven? Would you have helped? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story inspired you, hit the like button and share it. Because sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change a life forever. And remember, the greatest wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give.